Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that, well, we dig into the fascinating, sometimes the unexpected, and yeah, sometimes the downright uncomfortable stuff hidden in all the information noise out there.
That's us.
And today we are plunging headfirst, really, into a concept you've probably bumped into loads of times.
Oh, definitely.
Perhaps as a casual joke in a sitcom, or maybe that knowing wink between friends. It's the sort of thing that just floats around pop culture. Seems harmless enough on the surface.
Right, but it actually raises some genuinely kind of awkward questions, doesn't it? About attraction, gender dynamics, even the very basis of how we connect with people.
Exactly. We're talking about the, let's say, infamous crazy hot scale.
Sometimes called the hot crazy matrix. Yeah. Superficially, it's like this funny, almost pseudoscientific way to, I guess, categorize people, especially in the dating scene.
But if you scratch beneath that surface, you find this whole complex web, really. Societal biases, these ingrained psychological things, and some, frankly, pretty problematic ideas shaping how we see attractiveness, sanity, even romantic compatibility.
Yeah, it's a lot deeper than just a chart from a TV show.
So our mission today really is to take this colloquial idea, the one everyone kind of jokes about, and give it the full deep dive treatment. We're going to really explore its claims, break down how people see it, and critically look at whether there's any actual science or psychology or even just patterns in society that back up its, well, provocative ideas.
And just to be clear, this isn't about us endorsing the scale at all. It often carries some really sexist and ableist baggage.
Definitely not.
Our goal is more to understand what it reflects about us, about how we collectively perceive physical attractiveness, this idea of craziness, and how those things play out in relationships.
So get ready to maybe challenge some assumptions you hold, because we're about to dig into what crazy really means when it's weighed against hot. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Let's unpack this. What exactly is the crazy hot scale, or, the hot crazy matrix? And where did this kind of fascinating, but also kind of unsettling idea actually come from? Where did it first grab people's attention?
Well, fundamentally, the crazy hot scale is totally colloquial.
Yeah.
It's not academic, not scientific. It grew out of, just informal chats and observations about dating.
Right. Bar talk, maybe.
Exactly. But its big leap into the mainstream, becoming something lots of people know and talk about, can pretty much trace that back to one specific place, the TV show How I Met Your Mother.
Barney Stinson.
Yes, the character Barney Stinson. He was famous for all his outlandish theories about dating, his often really questionable pickup lines. He really made it popular. His guiding principle was, well, pretty blunt.
He said,
a girl or guy is allowed to be as equally crazy as they are hot. And that just took off. It became a catchphrase. It sort of summed up this certain kind of bro science way of looking at relationships that, well, it resonated with a lot of viewers, however problematic it actually is.
So it's basically like an informal subjective map, right? You're plotting someone's looks, their hotness, on one axis, and weighing that against their perceived craziness on the other. And when we say craziness here, we're obviously not talking clinical mental illness, usually. It's more like a spectrum of personality traits or behaviors someone might find undesirable, things that might make a relationship tough or chaotic. Is that fair?
That's exactly it. It's about setting a kind of perceived tolerance level. The whole idea is how much of what gets labeled crazy, difficult behavior, unpredictable stuff, maybe being high maintenance, how much someone is supposedly willing to put up with, based directly on how physically attractive the other person is.
Okay.
Now, Barney Stinson got the phrase out there, but the concept, it was actually expanded on quite a bit later by this online figure, Dana McClendon. He's a Texan lawyer, I think.
Right, I've seen that video.
Yeah. He took it beyond just a simple line and made it this more detailed, kind of quadrant-based matrix with specific zones. His take really solidified the scale's slightly pseudoscientific feel for a lot of people.
Ah, yes, the zones. McClendon's breakdown really does show the scale's underlying, if kind of uncomfortable, logic. Let's walk through those for the listener, because they really spell out these different perceived tolerance levels for craziness based on hotness.
Absolutely. So Dana McClendon sorts people into these different areas on his crazy hot matrix. Right down at the bottom, where both perceived hotness and craziness are low, you've got the no-go zone.
Okay, makes sense.
These are people seen as, well, both unattractive and highly crazy. In this way of thinking, they're basically off limits for dating. They don't have the looks, they don't have the perceived emotional stability, so there's no return on investment, I guess you could say, in pursuing a relationship.
Harsh, but that's the logic of the scale.
It is. Then, moving up, when the hotness goes way up, but the craziness also goes way up, you hit what McLennan calls the danger zone.
The danger zone sounds dramatic.
It is. This is where someone is like exceptionally attractive, a real head turner, but crucially also very, very crazy. McLennan had that famous line about it. This is where your tires get slashed and you end up in jail.
Right. So alluring, but high risk.
Exactly. It's that territory. People here are often described as maybe intensely passionate, unpredictable, capable of extreme reactions, exciting maybe, but potentially destructive as partners. The super high hotness might pull you in. But the extreme craziness is meant as this big warning sign. The relationship could lead to some serious personal trouble, emotionally, and sometimes, according to the stale dramatic talk, literally.
It's that kind of partner who promises these incredible highs but delivers crushing lows.
Yeah.
The emotional roller coaster that just leaves you dizzy.
Precisely that. And it almost suggests, doesn't it, that a certain level of hotness can make even danger itself seem appealing, at least for a bit.
Yeah, it speaks to maybe a pull towards intensity. Or maybe a belief you can handle or even fix someone like that.
Could be. Then you have the fun zone. These are people who are, say, moderately attractive and, importantly, not too crazy.
Okay. The fun zone.
Seen as good for short-term stuff, low commitment. They're pleasant enough, easygoing, probably won't cause a ton of drama. So ideal for maybe casual dates, a brief fling where you're not looking for deep emotional investment. Someone you'd enjoy a few nights out with, maybe, without expecting forever.
Got it. And then slightly different is the date zone.
Yeah, just above that is the date zone. This category, in McLennan's view, applies to attractive women who are, and this is the quote, a little bit crazy.
A little bit crazy.
Right, implying there's this specific, tolerable level of craziness that's okay for regular dating, especially if it's balanced out by enough hotness. It might even be seen as adding a little spice, or unpredictability that keeps things interesting as long as it doesn't cross into really problematic stuff.
So this is where someone might overlook a few quirks, maybe some emotional moments, because the physical attraction is strong enough to outweigh those minor issues. A calculated risk, almost.
That's the idea. The hotness provides enough reason to engage with what's seen as a manageable amount of crazy.
Okay. And then for people looking for something more serious, there's the goal, the aspirational wife zone. This is where the balance is supposedly perfect for long-term commitment.
Yes, the wife zone. This applies, again in this framework, to women who are very attractive but are only slightly crazy. This is framed as the ideal sweet spot for settling down. Enough hotness to keep things going long-term, but only a tiny, almost negligible amount of perceived crazy.
So the slight craziness here might just be endearing quirks, not actual red flags. Easily overlooked because she's very attractive.
That seems to be the implication. And then finally, there's the almost mythical category, the unicorn zone. These are women rated a perfect 10 for hotness, but are supposedly hardly crazy at all. They're presented as incredibly rare, almost too good to be true. McLennan even jokes, capture it safely, keep it alive. We would like to study it.
Which really highlights how rare and desirable this combination is supposed to be.
It does. And it says so much about the unrealistic expectations often placed on women, doesn't it? You have to be stunningly beautiful and perfectly emotionally regulated, almost like a robot, to fit this mythical ideal. The word unicorn itself suggests something almost inhumanly perfect. It sets an impossible standard.
It really is quite a spectrum. And it definitely sounds like it's describing a kind of societal tolerance level for certain behaviors tied directly to how someone looks. So just to be absolutely crystal clear here, the scale isn't necessarily arguing that hot people are inherently crazier than others, is it?
No, that's a really crucial distinction.
It seems more like it suggests that physical attractiveness works like a buffer. It lets people get away with more problematic stuff. Or what gets labeled crazy behavior, is that the core mechanism people think is at play.
That is exactly the crucial distinction, and you've nailed the most common interpretation of the scale's underlying mechanism. It's not really a comment on the inherent mental state or emotional stability of attractive people.
Okay.
Instead, it suggests their attractiveness gives them this kind of societal shield, a form of pretty privilege.
Right. Pretty privilege.
And this privilege means their problematic behaviors are more likely to be overlooked or excused or just tolerated more than they would be for someone seen as less attractive. There was this great explanation on Reddit that put it so well.
Yeah.
It said basically, The hotter you are, the more dumb, crazy opinions you can get away with having, because no guy is going to risk his chances by telling her the magic rocks and constellations won't make her witch friends live forever.
Wow. Okay, that's cynical, but it illustrates the point.
It really does. It shows this view that attraction can just override critical judgment. Essentially, attractive people are, quote, shielded from many of the consequences of being crazy. Why? Because their beauty creates this powerful incentive for other people to want to be around them or impress them or just not make waves.
So this pretty privilege means if an attractive person acts out, people are quicker to make excuses or just ignore it, while someone less attractive doing the same thing gets called out immediately.
That's the dynamic it describes. Society is often quicker to shun the normal-looking ones, as one source put it. This can create a really worrying feedback loop.
How so?
Well, if attractive people rarely face the natural consequences of their actions, maybe it's emotional manipulation, maybe impulsive choices, maybe even verbal aggression, they might never actually learn accountability. There's no corrective feedback.
I see.
And over time, this lack of consequences could potentially lead to more problematic behavior because there's no outside pressure pushing them to change. The scale, then, isn't just about putting labels on people. It's about the social dynamics that enable certain behaviors in certain individuals based purely on their looks.
Okay, so when we're talking about crazy, in this specific context, like within the crazy hot scale, are we talking about actual diagnosable mental illness, or is it mostly this broader, more informal meaning being used? It feels like the pop culture of crazy is pretty different from a clinical diagnosis.
That's an excellent point, and it's really crucial to draw that line. Now, while the pop culture idea of the scale uses crazy as this vague kind of catch-all term for, undesirable traits or behaviors, it's interesting that some academic research has actually tried to link it to clinical realities.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. For example, there was a UK study, and listen to the title, The Attractive X Borderline Personality Disorder, BPD Matrix Study. They specifically used borderline personality disorder as their measure for crazy.
Okay, BPD.
And just briefly, BPD is a complex mental health condition. It's characterized by things like persistently unstable moods, unpredictable behavior, and really difficult relationships. People with BPD often have intense emotional swings, they might act impulsively or take risks, and they often struggle a lot with their self-image and how they connect with others.
And why BPD specifically for that study?
Well, the study likely chose BPD because some of its key symptoms, like intense anger, a deep fear of abandonment, really turbulent relationships, these often mirror the kinds of behaviors that people informally label as crazy in the dating world.
Right. So that one study tried to put a clinical definition on the colloquial crazy. But the everyday use of the word, especially in pop culture, is much, much broader than that. It seems to cover a whole range of things someone might just find annoying or difficult or even threatening, not necessarily a diagnosed condition. Is that the main distinction we should keep in mind?
Precisely. The informal pop culture usage just lumps everything together. It could be moodiness, jealousy, being overly dramatic, or it could be simply having strong opinions, being assertive, maybe challenging how things are. It's a very broad, very imprecise, and often really unfairly applied label. And it's frequently used just to dismiss or invalidate someone's feelings or actions without even trying to understand what's behind them. And that's where the truly problematic side of the crazy hot scale comes out, because it takes this vague, often derogatory label and applies it to real human behavior.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me, especially thinking about why a woman's craziness might be seen to define her hotness, or at least be tolerated because of it. How often does that label crazy get slapped onto women just because they express strong emotions?
Yeah.
Or assert their opinions, or even just stand up for themselves in a relationship? It feels like there's this huge double standard that weaponizes women's feelings.
Oh, absolutely. There is a significant and deeply, deeply ingrained double standard. Women are disproportionately and often incredibly unfairly labeled crazy or psycho in relationships just for showing genuine passion or assertiveness, or even just expressing legitimate concerns and setting boundaries.
Right.
There's a piece from Broken Girl Unchained that puts it so powerfully. What is perceived as crazy by others is often really just passion.
That's a great quote.
Isn't it? Think about maybe a mother who's fighting fiercely for her kids' well-being in a tough co-parenting situation. Her determination might get painted as irrational or over-involved.
Yeah, I can see that.
Or just a woman having strong opinions about, say, shared money or future plans or her own needs in the relationship. That might be seen as threatening or challenging her partner's sense of control. These intense but often perfectly rational and justified emotional responses can just be dismissed with a wave of the hand and that simple but devastating label, crazy.
That's a really profound point. It suggests a woman's strength or her conviction or even just her basic right to have feelings can be turned against her by framing it as instability.
Exactly. And it feeds this problematic double standard. Like the same source pointed out, if I were a man, I would be respected for being strong and bold. But instead, women often find themselves labeled difficult, hard to understand, too emotional or out of control when they're simply speaking their minds, setting healthy boundaries, or refusing to stay silent about things that aren't right.
And it's not just about casual dismissal, is it? This can be a tactic.
Oh, absolutely. It's a form of emotional manipulation. And worse, this stereotype is frequently used as a tactic in unhealthy or even abusive relationships, particularly through gaslighting.
Gaslighting, right?
Which is that form of psychological manipulation where someone tries to make you doubt your own sanity, your perceptions, your memories. By labeling a woman's valid concerns as crazy, a manipulator can just dismiss her feelings entirely, make her question her own reality, and ultimately control her.
That's insidious.
It is. It's a way to undermine her self-trust and her agency. It forces her to internalize this idea that her legitimate feelings are somehow irrational or pathological. It leads to profound self-doubt, emotional distress. It strips away her ability to trust her own gut, making her more vulnerable to control.
So how does the hotness factor, the physical attractiveness, actually play into this?
Yeah.
How does it influence how this crazy behavior, whether it's real or mislabeled, is seen and tolerated? Does it really act like that shield the scale suggests? Does it make a woman's craziness somehow okay if she's hot enough?
It absolutely seems to, and this is where that concept of pretty privilege really snaps into focus.
Right.
Pretty privilege, again, is that pervasive societal advantage given to people deemed physically attractive. And research consistently shows that attractive people often get judged more leniently for their behavior. They can get away with loads more shit, as that Reddit thread bluntly put it. So in the context of the crazy hot scale, what this means is if you're seen as highly attractive, you're implicitly given more leeway for your actions. Society seems quicker to overlook or excuse or even rationalize problematic actions from attractive people. Maybe they attribute it to external factors or call them charming quirks.
Whereas someone less attractive.
Exactly. Someone perceived as normal looking or less attractive doing the same thing is more likely to be shunned, criticized, or held properly accountable.
Which creates that cycle you mentioned earlier.
Precisely, a really troubling cycle. Because if attractive individuals don't often face the natural consequences of poor actions, maybe it's manipulation, maybe impulsivity, maybe verbal aggression, they might never learn that accountability piece. There's no external push to change or grow because their attractiveness keeps opening doors and smoothing things over.
So the lack of corrective feedback lets the behavior continue or even escalate.
Potentially, yes. Over time, it could lead to increasingly problematic behavior because they get used to a reality where their actions don't have significant negative fallout. It can foster a sense of entitlement, maybe even stunt their emotional growth because they're never forced to really confront the impact of their craziness in the way a less attractive person might have to. So yeah, hotness can definitely make certain levels of craziness not just tolerated, but almost enabled.
Enabled, not just tolerated. Wow. This leads us straight to that core psychological idea, the beautiful is good heuristic. Could you break that down for us and explain how it fits into this dynamic?
Of course. The beautiful is good heuristic, or stereotype, is one of the most solid, widely replicated findings in social psychology. It describes this powerful cognitive bias we have, where physically attractive people are automatically, often unconsciously, seen as having a whole bunch of positive traits.
Like what?
Things like being more likable, smarter, more competent, more sociable, even more trustworthy. And this bias is incredibly potent. It operates everywhere. Research shows attractive people are more likely to get hired. They might get later sentences in court.
Seriously?
Yeah, even their ideas might be taken more seriously. And even when it comes to misbehavior or delinquency, attractive people tend to get more lenient reactions, more benevolent judgments compared to less attractive folks.
So even if they do something wrong?
Studies have shown, for example, that attractive people who act antisocially often face less aggression, less retaliation, and get more forgiveness from their victims. It suggests their attractiveness creates this strong, often subconscious desire in others to want to affiliate with them, even when their behavior is bad. It's like a mental shortcut our brains take. Physical beauty equals inner goodness, regardless of the actual evidence.
That's fascinating. It really shows how deep that bias runs.
Yeah.
But you mentioned there's a reverse effect too, right? The good is beautiful heuristic. How does that work, and what does it tell us about how maybe perceptions of craziness could actually affect perceived hotness?
Yes, exactly. The good is beautiful heuristic is the flip side. It shows this is really a two-way street between perceived character and physical attractiveness. It suggests that positive, non-physical traits like having a great personality, being kind, seeming mentally stable, can actually boost how physically attractive someone seems to us.
So being a good person makes you look better.
Basically, yes. Studies show if a target person is described as honest or compassionate or generally pro-social, people will rate their attractiveness higher, even if their objective facial features haven't changed at all. Their inner goodness literally makes them appear more beautiful.
Okay.
And conversely, if people find out about past actions that suggest someone has an immoral or deceitful or maybe crazy character, or someone unkind, manipulative, emotionally volatile, they tend to rate that person as less attractive.
So the negative stuff can detract from looks.
Precisely. And this is crucial because it sets the stage for understanding how a negative label, like having a mental illness or just being seen as crazy in that informal way, could potentially lower someone's hotness score in the eyes of others. If goodness makes someone seem more beautiful, then a perceived lack of goodness, which craziness often implies, could logically make them seem less so.
So it creates this subtle pushback. High hotness might allow for some crazy, but if that crazy really translates into fundamentally bad personality traits, it could actually start to erode the hotness itself. Even pretty privilege has its limits when true character shows through.
Exactly. It shows that the link isn't purely one-directional. Character does matter eventually.
Okay, so let's broaden out slightly from just crazy or mental illness. What about other attributes, like creativity? How does something like that impact attractiveness differently for men versus women, according to the research? This seems really relevant to how different traits get valued based on gender.
That's a great question. And yeah, it really shines a light on some of the nuanced and often pretty unfair gendered biases that exist around attraction. There was a study published in Royal Society Open Science that looked at exactly this using an online dating scenario.
And what did they find for men?
For men, it was pretty straightforward. Creativity does seem to boost attractiveness for men in the eyes of women. When a guy shows creativity maybe through art or innovative thinking, unique hobbies, it generally makes him more appealing to potential female partners. It kind of signals intelligence, resourcefulness, maybe a certain depth that women often find desirable.
Okay, that seems to track with common perceptions, maybe romantic ideals even. But the findings for women in that same study were quite different and honestly a bit discouraging, weren't they?
Unfortunately, yes. The results for women were surprisingly different. And yeah, many people find them quite disheartening. For women, the study found that creativity actually, quote, weakened the appeal of women with less attractive faces and offered no benefit to their attractiveness when displayed by women with attractive faces.
Wow. So creativity either didn't help attractive women or it hurt the attractiveness of less attractive women.
That's what the study suggested. It points to a potentially significant and troubling gendered bias in how creativity is valued romantically. It implies that for women, baseline facial attractiveness carries this incredibly disproportionate weight in how attractive they're perceived overall.
To the point where creativity either doesn't matter or can even be a negative if she isn't already conventionally good-looking.
That's the implication. It could be read as society, or at least some part of the dating pool, valuing a woman's looks above almost everything else, seeing her creativity as just secondary or maybe unnecessary, perhaps even intimidating if she's not already ticking the hot box.
That feels like a strong counter to what a lot of people might think or hope about modern relationships, especially now when we supposedly value diverse talents and intelligence more. I know some sources totally push back on that finding, arguing that, men love the hell out of a creative woman.
Right.
It just feels like perpetuating old myths that don't help anyone.
It really does. The author of that format article you mentioned, the one citing the study, strongly disagrees with the conclusion. They argue it ignores real-world observations and just feeds into harmful stereotypes that hurt both men and women. They point to the appeal of creative women, maybe even mentioning things like the manic pixie dream girl trope, which, while problematic itself, does implicitly acknowledge that a certain kind of quirkiness or creativity can be seen as appealing.
So there's a disconnect.
Yeah, the discrepancy really highlights how complex attraction is. Is it about genuinely appreciating a trait? Or is it more about how that trait fits into these pre-existing, often outdated gender roles? The study's finding, if you take it broadly, it definitely risks reinforcing that harmful idea that a woman's main value is her looks, and that things like intelligence or creativity might even be drawbacks if they don't enhance that appearance. That kind of narrow view hurts everyone, restricting what's seen as desirable and limiting how people can fully express themselves.
Okay, let's circle back now to the more direct impact of labels like crazy, or maybe more accurately clinically defined mental illness, on attractiveness. That Aiden et al. Study looked right at this, and the findings seem super relevant to how craziness can affect perceptions of hotness, even when someone is objectively attractive.
Indeed. The Aiden et al. Study gave us some really compelling evidence that just the mere label of mental illness can significantly lower how attractive someone is perceived and how positively their personality is evaluated.
How did they show that?
They did an experiment using an objectively attractive male target. So this was a guy already rated as very good looking by a separate group. But when this same attractive guy was described as having a mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, in one condition, the participants judged him much less favorably on personality traits, and they saw him as less attractive.
So the label directly impacted his perceived attractiveness.
Yes, and the effect was mediated, meaning it happened because people inferred less positive personality characteristics from the label. It directly links that good is beautiful idea to how mental illness stigma works. Basically, it shows that the powerful social stigma around mental illness is strong enough to diminish even the usual positive halo effect of being physically attractive. The label itself was enough to make an objectively hot guy seem less so. That really highlights how pervasive and deep-rooted mental health stigma is.
That's incredibly powerful. It shows the social weight of that label can override even objective good looks. But wasn't there also a crucial gender-specific finding in their exploratory results? This seems really important for understanding maybe who gets away with crazy and why, and how craziness might define hotness differently across genders.
Yes, that was a really significant, though they flagged it as exploratory, finding from Aiden et al. It gives this fascinating peek into gendered views of mental illness and attraction. What they found was that only the male participants, when they were evaluating the male target in the study, showed lower attractiveness ratings for the guy when he was labeled with depression or schizophrenia.
Wait, so only the men judging another man marked him down for having a mental illness label?
That's what the exploratory data suggested. In stark contrast, the female participants' attractiveness ratings of that same male target were not significantly affected by the mental illness label.
So men saw another man as less attractive if he had that label, but women looking at the same man weren't as swayed by the label in their attractiveness rating. That's a huge difference.
It's a striking difference, exactly.
Right.
Now, the researchers speculated about why this might be. The thinking is it could stem from men maybe being more susceptible to traditional masculinity stereotypes.
Like toughness, stoicism.
Exactly. Toughness, stoicism, strength, emotional control, those ideals. When mental illness is seen as violating those core masculine attributes, it might impact how attractive they perceive other men to be. It suggests that for some men, seeing mental illness in another guy might trigger this association with weakness or unreliability, which then detracts from his appeal.
But women didn't seem to make that same link.
Their evaluation seemed more stable regardless of the label in this study. Maybe because women, on average, might be less likely to equate vulnerability with unattractiveness in men. Or perhaps they weigh factors beyond just traditional masculine ideals when assessing a partner's overall appeal. It's complex, for sure, but it definitely suggests men and women might view the goodness and beauty of others through different lenses, especially when mental health comes into play. It also really highlights the societal pressure on men to hide emotional struggles, even from each other.
Okay, now let's shift from these controlled studies to the, let's say, raw and often unfiltered views you find in places like Reddit. What do those real-world anecdotes tell us about the connection between crazy and hot, especially when talking about women? They often give a more candid, even if less scientific perspective.
Oh, the Reddit threads are fascinating for that.
Yeah.
Sometimes blunt, Yeah, but undeniably insightful about how these ideas play out in actual dating experiences. One really common sentiment you see expressed is that crazy is often also crazy in bed.
Right, I've heard that trope.
Yeah. And that perception, whether it's accurate or just a stereotype, suggests this link between a partner's perceived unpredictability or intensity and their sexual dynamism. And this leads some men, quite openly, to admit they're willing to, quote, stick their dick in crazy as long as you wrap it up and don't marry it.
Wow, okay.
Which implies that for short-term things, the allure of perceived crazy behavior, especially if the person is also really hot, might be a distinct draw. Maybe it's the excitement, the spontaneity, the perceived intensity it brings. It becomes this calculated risk for a temporary thrill.
So it's like a short-term, almost transactional tolerance for drama and intensity, but definitely not for keeps. It suggests there's a clear line where the costs of the craziness start to outweigh the benefits of the hotness.
Exactly that. That casual acceptance for flings is almost universally followed by this widespread agreement that, quote, great sex wasn't worth all the downsides when it came to long-term relationships.
Right.
So many users on those threads share these really cautionary stories about the lasting mental, emotional, sometimes even financial damage from dating people labeled crazy, especially those with diagnosed conditions like BPD, despite how attractive they were initially or how intense the chemistry felt.
What kind of downsides do they describe?
Oh, everything. Constant emotional ups and downs, manipulative behaviors, those cycles of intense idealization followed by really cruel, devaluing, sometimes even legal battles or public shaming. The general feeling is that the initial excitement just quickly turns into total exhaustion, anxiety, feeling like you're constantly walking on eggshells, and that makes any physical attraction just fade away when faced with that sustained emotional chaos.
But there was also another really crucial, maybe more empathetic perspective that came out of those threads, right? About why some crazy behavior might be shown by hot women. That it's not always inherent craziness, but maybe a direct, understandable reaction to how they've been treated.
Yes, a very insightful and often completely overlooked point that emerged was this. Some of the actual crazy behavior exhibited by hot women can be, and this is a direct quote again, straight up defense mechanisms from a lifetime of being eye-fucked and worse by gross dudes on the regular, usually starting before their teens.
Wow, that reframes things completely.
It absolutely does. It shifts the focus from just labeling women as inherently crazy to maybe recognizing that their difficult or erratic behavior might be a direct, understandable response to chronic objectification, sexual harassment, constant unwanted advances, and maybe even that lack of accountability from others because of their pretty privilege.
So if you're constantly judged only on your looks, pursued relentlessly, maybe not taken seriously for your mind or character.
Exactly. It can breed hypervigilance, it can build defensive walls, it might even lead to striking out preemptively. Imagine growing up constantly seen as an object, having your boundaries ignored, experiencing a lifetime of unwanted attention, often starting really young. That can lead to deep trust issues, maybe a need for control, maybe emotional reactivity just as a way to protect yourself.
So they might lash out because it's the only way they learn to make people back off. Or test boundaries to see who actually respects them versus who's just interested in their looks.
Precisely. So what looks like crazy to an outsider could actually be a deeply ingrained, maybe maladaptive, but understandable coping strategy, born from trauma and constant external pressure. It really highlights how the way society treats people can inadvertently shape what gets perceived as craziness and feeds right back into the stereotypes the scale tries to measure.
Okay, let's pivot slightly beyond just the crazy label itself. Why do some people seem repeatedly drawn to relationships filled with drama or chaos? Like they're actively seeking that relationship roller coaster, maybe regardless of the partner's hotness.
That's a pattern so many people see, either in their own lives or people they know. And it often has really deep roots in our psychology and our early life experiences. For some people, drama genuinely provides this intense form of excitement. That emotional roller coaster feeling triggers a powerful rush of neurochemicals, think dopamine, adrenaline.
Like an addiction.
It can create an almost addictive cycle, yes. The unpredictable highs and lows, the thrilling makeups after huge fights, the constant twists, these can feel genuinely exhilarating. It makes people feel intensely alive, really engaged, even if the relationship itself is deeply unhealthy underneath. It becomes less about seeking genuine connection and stability, and more about chasing that emotional high.
And often, this isn't really a conscious choice, is it? It's more like something deeply ingrained, maybe coming from how things were growing up.
Precisely. That tendency to seek out or just tolerate drama can often be linked back to insecure attachment patterns. These usually develop from having unpredictable or inconsistent or maybe emotionally unavailable relationships with your main caregivers when you were young.
So if chaos felt normal early on,
Then for these individuals, unstable relationships might actually feel normal or even weirdly comfortable because that's what they experienced. And paradoxically, a secure, stable relationship can feel boring or even unsettling because it lacks that familiar intensity, those emotional peaks and valleys they've learned to associate with connection.
how do the different insecure attachment styles play into this?
Well, people with insecure attachment, whether it's anxious, avoidant, or the fearful avoidant type, they struggle with managing closeness and distance in relationships. Anxious attachment might look like clinging, needing constant reassurance, maybe even creating drama just to get a response from a partner to feel connected.
Oh, yeah.
Avoidant attachment might lead to pulling away emotionally, fearing intimacy, which then causes partners to pursue them, creating that push-pull dynamic full of drama. And fearful avoidant combines both, leading to huge internal conflict and often really chaotic relationship patterns. This internal struggle nearly always spills out externally as emotional highs and lows, anxiety, clinging, withdrawing, perpetually feeding that drama cycle.
So someone anxiously attached might actually provoke a fight just to feel something passionate from their partner, even if it's negative, because it briefly calms their fear of being abandoned.
Exactly. The drama becomes this twisted form of intimacy, a way to feel connected, even if it's through conflict.
And can drama also function as like a coping mechanism or a way to get validation, maybe distracting from other parts of life?
Absolutely. For some people, relationship drama can be a really powerful distraction from their own problems, maybe issues with personal growth, career dissatisfaction, unresolved trauma, health stuff. The relationship becomes this all-consuming thing, like a form of entertainment, an external focus that stops them from having to face the less exciting but maybe more important personal work they need to do.
Right, it fills the void.
It does. And then there's the validation piece. Some individuals actively seek validation by trying to fix a partner who seems troubled or dramatic. This pattern often goes back to childhood experiences where maybe they only felt valuable when they were taking care of a parent or caregiver, or perhaps in a dysfunctional family.
Trying to replay that role.
Subconsciously, yes. Trying to fix a partner can be an attempt to recreate that feeling of worth or control that was missing early on. And let's not forget, modern influences, social media often seems to applaud toxic love. You see phrases like, if it ain't toxic, I don't want it, getting thousands of retweets.
Yeah, that normalization is worrying.
It really is. It normalizes and even glamorizes these high-drama relationships, making them seem almost aspirational, despite how unhealthy they are. It sets a dangerous example, especially for younger people, suggesting that love has to be chaotic to be real or passionate.
This brings up a really important question. How does the wider societal stigma around mental health itself influence all these perceptions of crazy and how it impacts attraction? It feels like that underlying layer of stigma just makes everything we've discussed even more complex, harder to navigate.
It absolutely does. That foundational stigma profoundly complicates how people are seen, both in terms of craziness and hotness. Even though we talk more openly about mental health now than maybe ever before, there's still significant stigma and damaging stereotypes that persist globally.
And that has real consequences.
Huge consequences for people living with mental health challenges. It leads them to fear, disapproval, rejection, being excluded, facing discrimination in pretty much every part of life. They worry about their careers, finding housing, their friendships, and absolutely their romantic relationships. And this fear often stops people from seeking the help they desperately need, which just keeps the cycle of suffering going.
What are some of those common stigmatizing beliefs that still hang around?
Oh, things like the flawed idea that mental illnesses aren't real illnesses, that they're just character flaws or weaknesses, or that people can just snap out of it if they only tried harder, or that mental health issues are just an excuse for bad behavior. And maybe the most damaging one is the persistent stereotype that people with mental health problems are inherently angry, crazy, or psycho, and even potentially violent and dangerous. These beliefs, even though they're often totally unfounded, create this widespread fear and avoidance, making it incredibly hard for people to talk about their struggles and find acceptance. The crazy hot scale just taps into and reinforces these pre-existing, damaging stereotypes.
And this stigma isn't the same for everyone, is it? Men and women seem to face different kinds of barriers and fears when it comes to acknowledging mental health issues, which must affect how their craziness is perceived, too.
That's a really critical distinction, yeah. It highlights another layer of societal bias. Men often face these unique stigmas that are deeply rooted in traditional ideas of masculinity.
Like having to be tough.
Exactly. Toughness, stoicism, strength, independence, emotional control. These are hammered home in male socialization. So for many men, admitting to mental health problems or showing any kind of emotional vulnerability feels like a profound weakness. They worry about being labeled a sissy or a wimp or somehow less than a man.
Which stops them seeking help.
It creates huge pressure to just suppress emotions, to power through the distress, and that fear absolutely prevents many men from seeking the professional help they need, even when they're really struggling. You see this especially in professions that embody those traditional male traits, military, police, firefighters, where there's this ingrained culture of resilience and a real fear of being seen as unable to handle the pressure. It has devastating consequences. So the perception of craziness for men often gets tied up in this perceived failure to meet those masculine ideals.
So for men, it's largely about protecting that masculine identity, avoiding shame. What about for women? What unique stigmas do they deal with regarding mental health?
For women, the stigma often looks different, but it's just as insidious. While they might get criticized for showing traditionally masculine traits like aggression, a really powerful and often paralyzing fear for women, especially mothers, is being branded as an unstable or unfit mother.
Oh, wow, yeah.
That intense fear can lead them to hide their struggles, which just compounds the problem and stops them from getting support. Society puts this immense, often unrealistic pressure on women to be the emotional rocks, the primary caregivers. Admitting mental health struggles can feel like a direct threat to that core identity. It risks social judgment, maybe legal trouble in custody situations, or just the agonizing fear of having their kids taken away.
So they suffer in silence.
Many do, yeah. They internalize the distress rather than reaching out. There's a summary that puts it well. While men fear shame, women fear blame. These gender-specific fears create really significant, distinct hurdles for both men and women trying to get support. And they reinforce those broader societal myths about craziness and who gets it, making it harder for everyone to achieve genuine well-being.
Okay, moving beyond specific labels like crazy girlfriend or psycho X, where else do we see these deeply ingrained double standards playing out in dating and relationships? The ones that subtly shape how we judge people based on gender. It seems like they're everywhere, from casual dating to how we talk about celebrities.
You're absolutely right. These double standards are so pervasive, we often don't even notice them because they're just woven into how we think. Take casual hookups, for instance. A woman who enjoys casual sex or is just sexually liberated often gets labeled as easy or promiscuous, sometimes even slutty. She faces significant negative stereotypes, social judgment, sometimes even loses respect.
But a guy doing the same thing.
A man doing exactly the same thing, he typically faces no stereotypes at all. He's often praised, called a player, a stud, or just seen as sowing his wild oats. It reinforces these outdated ideas about male virility and conquest. It's the same behavior, but the judgment is completely different, based solely on gender.
And we see this blown up on a massive scale with celebrities, right? Like the whole Pete Davidson versus Taylor Swift comparison.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. Pete Davidson has undeniably dated a lot of high-profile, attractive women, and he's often praised for it, seen as charming, desirable, faces basically zero backlash. His dating history is framed like proof of his charisma. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift, whose dating history might be proportionally similar in terms of famous partners, gets constant hate, criticism, gets labeled as dating too much or being too emotional. It's such a clear example of the public reacting differently based purely on gender. It shows that deep double standard where men's dating histories are seen as conquests, signs of desirability, while women's are seen as grounds for criticism, proof of instability, or even perceived craziness. Her relationships often overshadow her actual work, which rarely happens to men.
And what about those traditional gender roles within a relationship? Like, who should be the main earner? Does that still carry some outdated weight, subtly influencing how we see a woman's desirability?
It certainly seems to. Even though things are changing, and ambition and financial independence in women are increasingly seen as attractive by many, there's still this lingering, outdated idea that women can't or maybe shouldn't be the breadwinners.
Really? Still.
Yeah. Some men, and maybe parts of society, still seem uncomfortable if a woman earns more or is the main financial provider. It can challenge traditional power dynamics, maybe bruise the male ego. It just highlights how these old expectations still influence how we perceive women's roles and desirability. It can subtly affect how a woman's hotness is viewed if she doesn't fit those outdated norms. Sometimes, a successful, independent woman might even get perceived as too much, or maybe even crazy, just for challenging those traditional roles.
This also brings to mind those archetypes we see in movies and stories, like the femme fatale. She seems like a classic example of exactly this mix. Attractiveness, perceived danger, societal anxieties about women, often blurring the lines between hot and crazy.
It's a perfect illustration, and it's so deeply embedded in our culture. The femme fatale archetype really blew up in 1940s and 50s film noir, right? That genre often explored the darker side of American life after the war. And historically, she served as this potent cautionary tale. She portrayed a woman's ambition, her independence, her sexuality as inherently dangerous, destructive to these supposedly otherwise innocent men, often leading them to ruin or death.
So it reflected anxieties of the time.
Absolutely. It directly reflected deep-seated male anxieties after World War II. Women had entered the workforce in huge numbers. They'd gotten a taste of economic and social freedom. The femme fatale, alluring but treacherous, symbolized the perceived threat to the old patriarchal ways. And the Hays Code, the film censorship rules back then, often demanded she be punished. She had to die or go to jail for her immoral, destructive behavior. It reinforced the message. Powerful, seductive women are trouble and must be contained. She was hot, yes, but her craziness, her ambition, her desire for agency was ultimately punished.
So historically, it wasn't about celebrating female power at all, more like containing and demonizing it. How has that archetype changed in more modern media? Does it still carry that problematic history?
Well, in more contemporary stuff, neo-noirs, thrillers, dramas, the femme fatale has evolved. She's often more of a fully developed three-dimensional being.
Yeah.
Her motivations are usually clearer, more nuanced, maybe rooted in her own experiences of oppression or her desire for liberation.
So we understand her better, maybe even reach for her.
Often, yeah. Viewers frequently sympathize with her, maybe even root for her. We recognize her struggle against patriarchal systems sometimes. She can now represent strength and empowerment rather than just being purely destructive. You see characters who are powerful and seductive, but their actions come from wanting justice or survival or self-preservation, not just pure evil.
But there's still issues, right? Especially around appearance.
Oh, definitely. A persistent and deeply problematic issue remains. Even with more diverse storytelling, the femme fatale archetype still largely sticks to these narrow, often unattainable beauty ideals, usually pale, slender, overwhelmingly Eurocentric features.
So it perpetuates a very specific look for powerful women.
Exactly. It perpetuates a very limited, exclusive standard of beauty. And it's crucial to mention the racist dragon lady stereotype often applied to Asian women. It serves a similar function, cunning, manipulative, sexually alluring, but also treacherous and dangerous, reinforcing harmful stereotypes about Asian femininity and tying perceived craziness to race.
So even modern portrayals have problems.
Ultimately, yeah. Even modern media portrayals, despite evolving, still push beauty ideals onto female viewers and contribute to unreasonable body standards. And these narrow depictions of hotness mean that if a woman doesn't fit that specific mold, her perceived craziness might be less tolerated. Or maybe she wouldn't even be deemed hot enough to have that dangerous allure of a true femme fatale. The media subtly tells us what kind of crazy is acceptable and for whom.
Wow. That was a truly expansive and often pretty unsettling look into a concept that, yeah, on the surface seems so simple, maybe even funny. As we wrap up this deep dive, it's incredibly clear that while the crazy hot scale might have started as a pop culture joke, our exploration shows that it really reflects these incredibly complex, often deeply problematic societal biases and psychological patterns, all tied to attractiveness, gender, and how we perceive mental health.
Indeed. We've definitely seen how hotness can influence what level of craziness gets tolerated or maybe even sought out, especially in the short term. It creates that kind of pretty privilege that lets certain behaviors slide.
Right.
But we've also really highlighted how much of what gets labeled craziness is often a gross mislabeling of genuine passion. Or maybe it's those deeply ingrained defense mechanisms people develop from a lifetime of objectification and trauma, or simply a coping mechanism for other issues, not inherent instability.
And that pervasive mental health stigma, with its really distinct and often brutal impacts on both men and women, just complicates everything further. It influences how we see others, how we see ourselves. It's not just about what we observe, but the deeply ingrained, often biased stories we've been taught to apply.
Absolutely.
The whole interplay between how someone looks and how emotionally stable we think they are is just far more nuanced, far more culturally constructed than any simple two-axis graph could possibly show.
Absolutely. That idea that attractiveness can shield people from consequences, or that a woman's valid passion can just be conveniently dismissed as pathology, it really underscores how deep these biases run in our social fabric. It really challenges us, doesn't it, to look past those surface judgments and question the stereotypes that shape how we perceive hotness and craziness.
It does.
It's a powerful reminder that our perceptions aren't always based on objective reality. They're often rooted in this complex tangle of societal expectations, historical baggage, and our own personal experiences.
So the final provocative thought for you, listening. What stands out to you from this deep dive? How might these ingrained societal narratives about crazy and hot be subtly influencing your own perceptions of other people? Or maybe even shaping the dynamics in your own relationships, whether you realize it or not?
Yeah, we really encourage you to reflect on that, to maybe scrutinize those casual jokes a bit more, and consider the deeper weight of the labels we sometimes apply so easily.
Thank you for joining us on this, enlightening journey through the complexities of attraction, perception, and bias.
We hope it sparked some new thoughts and encourages you to keep challenging those ingrained biases, both in how you think and how you interact with others.
And to keep questioning the world around you, always digging deeper for that true understanding. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.